Her husband's mistress was on the stand, dismantling her life piece by piece with a cruel, knowing smile. For Callista Bennett, sitting in the cold, sterile courtroom, it felt like the final act of a tragedy she was forced to star in. The woman who had stolen her husband was now trying to steal her children's future, mocking her very motherhood, the one pure thing Callista had left. The lawyers droned on, the judge looked weary, and all hope seemed to be draining away. But what no one in that room knew, least of all the smug mistress, was that a single devastating question was about to be asked. A question that would shatter her confidence and expose a lie so profound it would change everything in an instant. The morning air of October 14th was crisp and unforgiving, much like the reflection staring back at Callista Bennett from the hallway mirror. The woman in the glass looked like a stranger. Her eyes, normally a warm hazel, were shadowed with exhaustion, framed by faint lines of stress that hadn't been there a year ago. She adjusted the collar of her navy blue blazer, a suit she'd bought for job interviews in a life that now felt like a distant dream. Today, it was her armor for a battle she never wanted to fight. Down the hall, she could hear the gentle morning sounds of her real life, the one that mattered. The soft babble of 3-year-old Leo arguing with a stuffed giraffe, and Lily's infectious giggle in response. They were her world, her twin anchors in a raging sea. Maria, the kindly nanny who had become more of a sister over the past year, was getting them dressed, shielding them from the tension that had seeped into the very walls of their home. This house, once a symbol of shared dreams with her husband Holden, was now just a contested asset, item 4B on a legal document. Her mind drifted back, as it so often did, to the beginning. She and Holden had been a storybook couple. They met in college, he the ambitious business major with a disarming smile, she the bright art history student with a passion for Renaissance painters. He had courted her with a fierce intensity, promising her a life of partnership and adventure. And for 12 years he had delivered. He built a successful financial consultancy firm, Bennett and Associates, from the ground up. Callista, meanwhile, had put her own career aspirations, curating for a museum, on hold. It was a joint decision. They wanted a family, and when they discovered they were having twins, Holden had insisted she stay home. "I'll build the empire, Callista," he'd said, holding her close, his hand resting on her swelling belly. "You build the home. We're a team." She had believed him. She poured all her creative energy into their home, into raising Leo and Lily. She managed their lives with the precision of a master curator, orchestrating play dates, doctor's appointments, and family vacations, creating a beautiful, loving world for their children. She was happy. She was fulfilled. She realized now with a bitter pang, completely naive. The cracks had started subtly. Holden worked later and later. Business trips became more frequent. He grew distant, his phone always angled away from her, a password newly installed. She'd tried to talk to him, to bridge the growing chasm between them, but he dismissed her concerns as the hormonal anxieties of a tired mother. He made her feel small, needy. The truth came not in a dramatic confession, but in the cold, impersonal form of a credit card statement she'd opened by mistake. A charge for a suite at the Fairmont Hotel, right here in the city, on a night he was supposedly in Chicago closing a deal. And below it, a charge from a boutique called Seduction Lingerie. The name was so cliché it would have been laughable if it hadn't felt like a physical blow. The woman's name was Candace Monroe. Callista found her easily on the company website. She was a recent hire, a senior analyst, 28 years old with sharp, ambitious eyes and a smile that didn't quite reach them. She was everything Callista wasn't anymore. Sleek, career-driven, and unburdened by the beautiful chaos of motherhood. The confrontation had been ugly. Holden didn't even have the decency to lie. He was tired, he'd said. Tired of the noise, the mess, the endless needs of 2 toddlers. He claimed Callista had let herself go, not physically, but intellectually. She'd become just a mom. He said it as if it were an insult, as if the role she had dedicated her life to, at his own urging, was now a mark of shame. Candace, he explained with infuriating calmness, understood the pressures of his world. She was his intellectual equal. They connected on a different level. Within a week, he had moved out. Within a month, he had filed for divorce. Now, 6 months later, the battle lines were drawn. It wasn't just about assets anymore. Holden, coached by his ruthless lawyer, was fighting for majority custody. He was painting Callista as an unstable, overwhelmed mother, incapable of providing the structured environment the twins needed. It was a narrative crafted by him, and Callista was sure, by Candace, who was scheduled to testify against her today. The woman who had helped destroy her family was now going to sit in a courtroom and offer her expert opinion on Callista's fitness as a mother. The injustice of it was a burn in her chest. "Callista!" Maria's soft voice broke through her reverie. She stood at the end of the hall, her expression a mixture of pity and encouragement. "Mr. Petrocelli is here." Daniel Petrocelli was Callista's salvation. A calm, methodical man in his late 50s, he had been recommended by a friend. He wasn't a flashy courtroom brawler, but he had a reputation for being meticulous, for finding the single thread that could unravel an entire tapestry of lies. He had listened to her story without judgment, his gaze sharp and intelligent. He'd warned her it would get ugly, that Holden's team would try to break her. She walked into the living room. Petrocelli stood by the window, his briefcase on the floor. He gave her a small, reassuring nod. "Are you ready, Callista?" She took a deep breath, the scent of baby powder and toasted waffles from the kitchen momentarily steadying her. She thought of Leo's tight hugs and Lily's bell-like laughter. They were the reason she had to be ready. "Yes," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. "Let's go." The drive to the courthouse was a blur of traffic and gray buildings. Petrocelli prepped her one last time. "Gideon Shaw, Holden's attorney, is going to be aggressive. He will try to provoke you. He will twist your words. Do not take the bait. Answer only the question asked. Be calm, be factual, and look at me if you feel unsure. But when Candace Monroe takes the stand, I want you to watch her. Watch her every move. Understand?" Callista nodded, her hands clenched in her lap. Walking up the grand stone steps of the King County Courthouse felt like climbing a gallows. And then she saw them, Holden and Candace, standing near the entrance talking to Shaw. Holden looked handsome and confident in his tailored charcoal suit. Candace was immaculate in a cream-colored dress that was both professional and undeniably alluring. She laughed at something Shaw said, the sound sharp and bright in the morning air. Then her eyes met Callista's from across the plaza. The smile on Candace's face didn't falter. It widened. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated triumph, a victor's smile before the battle had even begun. In that one look, she communicated everything. "I won. He's mine. This life is mine now." Callista felt a tremor of rage and despair run through her, but then she felt Petrocelli's hand gently on her elbow. "Breathe, Callista," he murmured, his voice low and steady. "Let her have her moment. Ours will come." He guided her past them, into the cold marble echo of the courthouse. The longest walk of her life had just begun. The courtroom was smaller than Callista had imagined, but infinitely more intimidating. The dark wood paneling seemed to absorb all the light and sound, creating a heavy, solemn atmosphere. The air was thick with the scent of old paper, floor polish, and a faint metallic tang of anxiety. Everyone seemed to have a role to play in this grim theater. The bored-looking bailiff, the focused court stenographer, the clerks shuffling papers with practiced indifference. Presiding over it all was Judge Loretta Davies, a woman in her 60s with a stern, intelligent face and hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to pull at her features. Her expression was one of impartial patience, but her eyes missed nothing. Callista sat at the plaintiff's table, with Daniel Petrocelli to her right. Across the aisle, Holden sat with his lawyer, Gideon Shaw. He steadfastly avoided her gaze, focusing instead on a yellow legal pad where he doodled pointless geometric shapes. It was his tell. When he was lying or profoundly uncomfortable, he doodled. He'd done it during their first mortgage meeting and again in the hospital waiting room before the twins were born. Seeing it now filled Callista with a cold, clear certainty of his deception. Gideon Shaw was the exact opposite of Petrocelli. He was all sharp angles and theatrical gestures, with a voice that boomed with manufactured sincerity. He began his opening statement by painting a glowing picture of Holden Bennett, a self-made man, a pillar of the community, a loving father driven to this unfortunate legal proceeding out of sheer concern for his children's well-being. "This is not about money, Your Honor," Shaw declared, pacing before the judge's bench. "This is not about animosity. This is about what is best for two innocent children, Leo and Lily Bennett. And what is best for them is stability, structure, and a parent who is fully present. We will demonstrate that my client, Mr. Bennett, can provide that. And we will, regrettably, have to demonstrate that the plaintiff, Mrs. Bennett, is currently unable to do so." Petrocelli remained perfectly still, his hands folded on the table. He'd warned Callista this was coming. Shaw called his first witness, a child psychologist named Dr. Alistair Finch. Dr. Finch had been hired by Holden's team and had conducted 2 brief evaluation sessions with the twins. He spoke in academic, dispassionate tones, describing Callista as exhibiting signs of significant maternal stress and being visibly overwhelmed. He noted that during his observation, the twins were unruly and Callista struggled to maintain control. On cross-examination, Petrocelli dismantled him with quiet precision. "Dr. Finch," Petrocelli began, his voice calm and conversational, "in your report, you state that you observed the children for a total of 2 sessions, each lasting 1 hour. Is that correct?" "Yes, that is the standard," Finch replied coolly. "And these sessions took place in your office, a sterile, unfamiliar environment for these 3-year-old children?" "My office is designed to be child-friendly." "But it's not their home, is it? It's not their playroom with their own toys and their own beds." "No, it is not. And you note that the twins were unruly. Could you describe this behavior for the court?" Dr. Finch consulted his notes. "Leo Bennett refused to engage in the structured play I initiated and instead threw several soft blocks. Lily Bennett was crying and clung to her mother for the majority of the first session. So a 3-year-old boy, in a strange room with a strange man, threw soft toys. And his twin sister, also in a strange room with a strange man, wanted her mother. You characterize this as unruly and a sign of an unstable home environment?" Finch shifted in his seat. "It can be an indicator of a lack of established boundaries." "It could also be," Petrocelli countered gently, "the perfectly normal reaction of 2 toddlers in a stressful situation. Wouldn't you agree that's a possibility, Doctor?" Finch hesitated. "It is a possibility." Petrocelli continued, chipping away at every observation, reframing perfectly normal toddler behavior, tantrums, separation anxiety, sibling squabbles, as just that rather than the damning evidence of maternal failure Shaw's team had presented it as. By the time he was done, Dr. Finch's expert testimony sounded less like a professional diagnosis and more like the grumpy observations of a man who didn't spend much time around actual toddlers. But Shaw was just getting started. He called a series of witnesses designed to build his narrative. A neighbor who testified she'd once heard Callista raise her voice in the backyard. "Were children crying?" Petrocelli asked on cross. "No," the neighbor admitted. "So you have no idea what she was shouting about?" "No." He called one of Holden's business partners, who spoke of Holden's deep love for his children and his constant worry over his wife's fragile state. With each witness, Callista felt a piece of her life being twisted and misrepresented. The beautiful, messy, loving home she had created was being repainted as a chaotic, stressful, and unstable environment. She followed Petrocelli's instructions, keeping her face a mask of calm neutrality, but inside a storm was raging. She could feel Candace's eyes on her from the gallery, a silent, smug spectator at the public dissection of her life. Finally, after the lunch recess, Gideon Shaw stood and called his next witness. The defense calls Ms. Candace Monroe to the stand. A ripple of anticipation went through the courtroom. This was the moment. The other woman. Callista's heart began to pound against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. She watched as Candace rose from her seat in the gallery and walked toward the witness stand. She moved with a fluid, confident grace, her heels clicking softly on the tiled floor. Her cream-colored dress was impeccable, her blonde hair styled in a sleek, professional bob. She looked directly at Holden as she passed his table and gave him a tiny, almost imperceptible nod of support. Then she sat, arranged her dress, and turned to face the court. Her expression was one of serene composure. She looked, Callista thought with a surge of revulsion, like she belonged there, as if this was her arena. Shaw began gently, establishing her credentials and her professional relationship with Holden. She spoke in a clear, articulate voice, detailing how she and Holden had worked closely on a high-stakes merger. And in the course of your professional collaboration, did you also come to know Mr. Bennett on a personal level? Shaw asked. Yes, Candace said, her voice softening with feigned reluctance. Holden, Mr. Bennett, he was under an incredible amount of stress, not just from work. He spoke often of his home life. What did he tell you about his home life? Objection, Petrocelli said calmly. Hearsay. Sustained, Judge Davies said. Ms. Monroe, you can only testify to what you personally observed, Shaw rephrased. Did you ever observe Mr. Bennett in a state of distress that you could attribute to his home life? All the time, Candace said, her eyes flicking towards Callista for a fraction of a second. He would come into the office looking utterly drained. He'd be on the phone, trying to calm things down at home. I'd overhear him pleading, trying to reason with his wife. He was always worried about the children, about the chaotic environment. She was good, Callista had to admit. She was a brilliant actress. She was weaving a story of a noble man trapped in a difficult marriage with an unstable woman, and she was his sole confidant, his savior. Ms. Monroe, Shaw said, his voice dripping with sympathy, can you describe any specific instances? There were many, Candace said, pausing as if to recall a painful memory. I remember one evening we were working late to meet a deadline. His phone rang. It was the nanny. She said Callista had locked herself in her room and wouldn't come out, and the children were crying. Holden had to leave everything and rush home. He looked so broken, so worried for his kids. A lie, a complete and utter fabrication. The incident never happened. Callista had never locked herself in her room. It was a perfectly crafted story, impossible for Callista to disprove without sounding hysterical. She felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at the jury members. A few were looking at her with expressions of pity and concern. It was working. Shaw moved in for the kill. So, in your observation, Mr. Bennett's primary concern was always the welfare of his children? Always, Candace affirmed, her voice ringing with sincerity. He loves Leo and Lily more than anything. He just wants them to have a calm, stable home. That's all he's ever wanted. She looked directly at Callista then, a flicker of a smile on her lips. It was a look of utter dominance. I'm rewriting your life story, the look said, and there's not a single thing you can do to stop me. Gideon Shaw had laid the foundation, brick by deceitful brick. Now he was ready to place the capstone. He walked closer to the witness stand, his demeanor shifting from sympathetic to conspiratorial, as if he and Candace were sharing a profound and unfortunate truth with the court. Ms. Monroe, he said, his voice low and serious, you mentioned the chaotic environment at the Bennett home. Did Mr. Bennett ever elaborate on what made it so chaotic? He did, Candace said, her gaze fixed on Shaw, but her words aimed like arrows at Callista. He adored his children, but he admitted that having two at once, twins, was incredibly taxing on Callista. He felt she was constantly overwhelmed, unable to cope with the demands. Petrocelli shifted in his seat, but didn't object. He was letting her have the rope. So the issue wasn't the children themselves, but Mrs. Bennett's reaction to the pressures of raising them? Shaw prompted. Exactly, Candace agreed smoothly. Holden is a very hands-on father. He wanted to be there to help, but he felt that Callista's anxiety created a tense atmosphere that was bad for everyone. He once told me he felt like he had 3 children to take care of, not 2. A collective murmur went through the courtroom. Callista felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. It was a masterful distortion. The nights she'd been up with 2 sick babies, the exhaustion she'd felt after a day of nonstop toddler energy, all of it was being twisted from the normal challenges of motherhood into a personal failing, a mental deficiency. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. Shaw paused for effect, letting the damning statement hang in the air before turning his back on Callista and facing Candace fully. And did you ever witness Mrs. Bennett's behavior with the children yourself? Only once, briefly, Candace said, her expression becoming one of carefully constructed pity. Holden and I were having a lunch meeting nearby, and we stopped by the house so he could pick up a file he'd forgotten. Callista was in the living room with the twins. The place was a mess. Toys everywhere, food on the floor. Leo was having a tantrum, and Lily was crying. Callista was just sitting on the sofa, staring into space. She looked completely vacant. Another lie, a calculated, venomous lie. A lunch meeting? He hadn't come home for a file. He'd come to pick up his golf clubs for a weekend business trip that turned out to be a getaway to Napa with her. The house was messy because the twins had just finished finger painting. Leo was upset because he'd gotten paint on his favorite shirt. Callista had been sitting for a moment to catch her breath, but Candace had seen it all through a prism of malice and spun it into a portrait of neglect. Now came the moment that would forever be seared into Callista's memory. Shaw, seeing the impact Candace's testimony was having, decided to press his advantage. He wanted to deliver the final emotional blow. So, from everything you heard from Mr. Bennett and the little you saw for yourself, you formed the impression that Mrs. Bennett was simply not equipped to handle the unique challenge of raising twins? Candace leaned forward slightly, a look of profound, almost philosophical sadness on her face. She finally turned her head and looked directly at Callista. For the first time, her mask of professional sympathy slipped, replaced by a cold, sharp-edged contempt. Her voice when she spoke was laced with a condescension that cut Callista to the bone. "I wouldn't presume to judge her entire character," Candace began, the false humility making her next words even more brutal. "But I will say this. From a biological and psychological standpoint, raising a child is the most demanding job in the world. To have two at once." She gave a small, disbelieving shake of her head. "Well, that's a unique kind of pressure. It's no wonder he felt the need to find a space where he could just breathe, an environment that was calm and supportive, not one of constant, dual-fronted chaos." "Two at once," she repeated, her lips curling into a tiny, mocking smile as she held Callista's gaze. "Must be such a terrible handful. I can't imagine why anyone would want to sign up for that." The courtroom fell silent. The words "terrible handful" echoed in the space, a deliberate, cruel insult disguised as an observation. It wasn't just a critique of Callista's parenting. It was a dismissal of her children, a judgment on the very nature of her family. It was the ultimate mockery, delivered by the woman who had slept with her husband, from the witness stand of a court that would decide her children's fate. Callista felt the air leave her lungs. The room swam for a second. The carefully constructed wall of composure she had maintained for hours crumbled into dust. A single hot tear escaped her eye and traced a path down her cheek. She didn't bother to wipe it away. She looked at Holden, hoping for a flicker of shame, of decency. He just stared at his legal pad, doodling furiously. He was letting her do this. He was a coward. Gideon Shaw saw her tear and knew he had scored a direct hit. He beamed. "Thank you, Ms. Monroe. No further questions, Your Honor." Judge Davies looked at Callista, her expression unreadable, then turned to her lawyer. "Mr. Petrocelli, your witness." Daniel Petrocelli rose slowly. He took a sip of water from the glass on the table, his movements deliberate and unhurried. He didn't look at Callista. He didn't need to. He had seen her tear. He had heard the collective intake of breath in the room. He walked towards the witness stand not with the swagger of Gideon Shaw, but with the quiet, steady gait of a watchmaker approaching a complex and delicate mechanism. He stopped a few feet from Candace. She was still radiating confidence, flushed with the success of her performance. She looked at him, her chin high, ready for a fight. "Good afternoon, Ms. Monroe," Petrocelli said, his voice even and devoid of emotion. "Mr. Petrocelli," she replied, her tone crisp and businesslike. "You have painted a very clear picture for us," he began. "A picture of a man in distress, a marriage in turmoil, and a home in chaos. A picture based, correct me if I'm wrong, almost entirely on statements made to you by Holden Bennett, your boss, and your lover." "I testified to what I saw and heard," she said, unruffled. "Indeed," Petrocelli said. "You spoke of your concern for Mr. Bennett, for his well-being." "Yes." He's a good man going through a difficult time. And you believe you provide him with a calm, supportive environment? I do. An environment free from the, how did you put it, the dual-fronted chaos of his children? Candace's smile tightened. Holden needs a partner who supports him, not one who adds to his burdens. I see, Petrocelli said, nodding slowly. He picked up a file from his table and opened it, though he barely glanced at the pages. He was building the silence, letting the tension ratchet up. Callista watched him, her breath held. This was it. This was the moment he had told her to wait for. He began to ask her about her professional life, starting with her current role at Bennett & Associates. He asked about her previous job at a firm in Seattle, then the one before that in San Francisco. It seemed aimless, a routine check of her resume. Candace answered with growing impatience, clearly wondering where this was going. Gideon Shaw looked bored. And before your position in San Francisco, Petrocelli continued, his voice still maddeningly calm, you were an intern at a small marketing firm in Portland, Oregon. Is that correct? Candace's eyes narrowed slightly. Yes, it was a summer internship during college. I see it's listed on your resume here, Petrocelli said, tapping the paper. From May to August of 2013, if that's what it says. But I'm seeing a small gap in your timeline, Ms. Monroe. Your university transcripts show you took a leave of absence for the spring semester of 2014. From January through May, a full semester, yet there's no corresponding work experience listed on your CV. Can you tell the court what you were doing during those 5 months? The question landed, and for the first time, a flicker of something, not fear, but uncertainty, crossed Candace's face. The armor had its first chink. The courtroom, which had been buzzing with whispers after Candace's cruel testimony, grew quiet again. A different kind of tension was now at play. It was no longer the overt drama of a scorned wife and a confident mistress, but something subtler, more dangerous. It was the quiet hum of a secret being slowly, meticulously unearthed. Candace shifted in her seat. Her posture, once so arrogantly relaxed, was now rigid. I was dealing with a personal matter, she said, her voice a little too sharp. It has no bearing on this case. I'm sure you're right, Petrocelli said agreeably. But a 5-month gap for a woman as ambitious as yourself seems noteworthy. Were you ill? No. Were you traveling? No. Were you perhaps not in Portland during that time? Gideon Shaw stood up. Objection, Your Honor. Relevance? Mr. Petrocelli is on a fishing expedition into my witness's personal life. Judge Davies looked at Petrocelli, her brow furrowed. Where are you going with this, counsel? Your Honor, Petrocelli said, addressing the judge but never taking his eyes off Candace. Ms. Monroe has presented herself as an expert on the pressures of motherhood. She has passed a very specific, very cruel judgment on my client's ability to handle twins, framing it as an unbearable burden. I believe her own life experiences during this 5-month period are directly relevant to her credibility on that exact subject. The judge considered this for a long moment. A silent battle of wills was being waged. Then she gave a curt nod. I'll allow it for now, but get to the point, Mr. Petrocelli. Shaw sat down, looking annoyed. Petrocelli turned back to Candace. Her face was a pale, tight mask. The smug confidence was gone, replaced by a brittle defensiveness. So, Ms. Monroe, let's try again, he said, his voice still gentle, which somehow made it more menacing. The spring of 2014, you took a leave of absence from the University of Oregon. Where were you? Candace swallowed. I was staying with family. With family, I see. And where does this family live? That's private. Is it? Petrocelli walked back to his table and picked up a single sheet of paper. Because I have here a copy of a short-term lease agreement for a small 1-bedroom apartment at the Oakwood Villa complex, not in Portland, but in a small town about 3 hours south. Medford, Oregon. The lease is for 6 months starting in January 2014, and it's in your name, Candace Marie Monroe. Were you visiting family in Medford, Miss Monroe? Callista stared at Candace, her heart hammering. She could see the panic blooming in the other woman's eyes. This wasn't just a crack in the facade. The entire wall was beginning to tremble. Holden was looking at Candace now, his expression a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. This was not part of their plan. I, I needed some time away, Candace stammered, her voice losing its crisp, articulate edge. Away from what? The pressures of a sophomore-level marketing course? Petrocelli asked, a hint of steel entering his tone. Or were you there for a specific purpose? The apartment at Oakwood Villa is less than 2 miles from the Rogue Valley Medical Center, isn't it? And even closer to St. Joseph's Hospital. He was closing a net around her, and everyone in the room could feel it. The air crackled. The court stenographer's fingers flew across her machine, capturing every word of the slow, methodical vivisection. You've testified at length today about the tremendous burden of children, Petrocelli said, his voice dropping lower, more intimate, forcing everyone to lean in. You mock my client, suggesting that having 2 babies at once was a terrible handful. You presented yourself as someone looking from the outside at a situation you couldn't possibly comprehend, passing judgment from a position of childless, unburdened freedom. He took a step closer to the witness box. But that's not entirely true, is it, Miss Monroe? He asked softly. You're not looking from the outside at all. You have a much deeper, much more personal understanding of the pressures of motherhood than you've led this court to believe. Candace just stared at him, her lips pressed into a thin white line. She was cornered. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Objection! Shaw yelled, leaping to his feet again. This is harassment. The witness is clearly distressed. Your Honor, this has gone too far. Mr. Petrocelli, Judge Davies warned, her voice sharp. If you have a point, you will make it now. No more games. Yes, Your Honor, Petrocelli said with a respectful nod. He turned to Candace, his eyes holding hers. The final piece was about to be put in place. The entire courtroom was holding its breath. Callista felt a strange sense of detachment, as if she were watching a play. The pain and humiliation she'd felt moments ago were replaced by a cold, dreadful anticipation. Petrocelli didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The quiet force of the question he was about to ask would be louder than any shout. He let the silence stretch for 1, 2, 3 more seconds, ensuring he had the absolute undivided attention of every person in the room. Most of all, Candace. Ms. Monroe, he said, his voice a model of calm forensic inquiry. Let's be very specific. On April 12, 2014, at St. Joseph's Hospital in Medford, Oregon, medical records show that you, Candace Marie Monroe, gave birth to a baby boy. You named him Noah. He paused, letting the bombshell settle. Holden's face went slack with shock. He looked from Petrocelli to Candace, his mouth slightly agape. He clearly had no idea. Petrocelli leaned in, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was still audible in the dead silent room. And then he delivered the final, devastating blow. Can you please tell the court, Ms. Monroe, what happened to your son? The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade, poised and terrible. For a moment there was no sound at all. Not a cough, not a rustle of paper, nothing but the stunned, collective silence of a room that had just witnessed a soul being laid bare. Candace Monroe, who had entered the courtroom a paragon of sleek, untouchable confidence, simply shattered. The color drained from her face, leaving behind a waxy, sickly pallor. Her carefully constructed composure dissolved into a raw, primal panic. Her eyes, wide with horror, darted from Petrocelli to the judge, to her lawyer, and finally to Holden, searching for a lifeline that wasn't there. Holden looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. His face was a canvas of disbelief and betrayal. This woman, his partner, his confidant, the one who understood him, had a secret life he knew nothing about, a secret child. All his carefully crafted plans for the trial, all the lies they had built together, were collapsing around him. Candace's breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. She looked at Petrocelli, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The confident witness was gone. In her place was a terrified young woman, haunted by a past she thought she had successfully buried. I don't, she began, her voice a fractured whisper, completely unrecognizable from the clear, assertive tone she had used just minutes before. You don't have to answer that, Gideon Shaw shouted, finding his voice. He was on his feet, his face flushed with anger and desperation. Your Honor, this is an outrageous and cruel violation of my witness's privacy. This has absolutely no relevance. It has every relevance, Your Honor, Petrocelli countered, his voice finally rising with controlled fire. This witness took the stand and with chilling cruelty mocked my client's motherhood. She called her children a terrible handful. She used Callista Bennett's love for her twins as a weapon against her. She built her entire testimony on the premise that she is a detached, rational observer and that my client is an emotional, overwhelmed mother. But the truth is, Ms. Monroe's judgment is not detached at all. It is poisoned by a deep personal secret. She wasn't mocking my client. She was projecting her own history, her own choices, onto a woman who had the family she, for whatever reason, chose not to have. Her credibility as a witness on the subject of motherhood is not just compromised, it is utterly obliterated. Every word was a hammer blow, striking not just Candace but the very foundation of Holden's case. Judge Davies stared down at the trembling woman in the witness box. Her usual stern expression had softened into something more complex. It was not pity, but a profound judicial seriousness. The theatricality of the courtroom had vanished, replaced by the weight of a raw human tragedy. Ms. Monroe, the judge said, her voice firm but not unkind, the question has been asked and I have deemed it relevant. You will answer, Mr. Petrocelli. Candace began to shake her head, tears welling in her eyes and spilling down her cheeks, leaving dark tracks in her perfect makeup. I can't, she choked out. Please. Ms. Monroe, the judge repeated, her voice leaving no room for argument. Answer the question. What happened to your son, Noah? The dam broke. A terrible, gut-wrenching sob escaped Candace's lips. It was a sound of profound, bottomless grief. All the arrogance, all the malice, all the smug superiority was washed away in an instant, replaced by a torrent of pain. He was adopted, she cried, the words torn from her. It was a closed adoption. I was 20 years old. I was alone. I had no money, no future. I wanted him to have a better life. I gave him up so he could have a better life. Her confession, ragged and desperate, filled the courtroom. The woman who had sneered at the chaos of 2 children had a child of her own, a son somewhere in the world whose existence she had hidden from everyone, including the man she had helped tear from his own family. The mockery she had directed at Callista was suddenly cast in a horrifying new light. It wasn't simple contempt. It was the bitter, resentful lashing out of someone who had made an impossible choice and had to live with the consequences every single day. Callista's life, the messy, chaotic, beautiful life with her twins, was a constant, painful reminder of what Candace had lost or given away. Callista looked at Candace, and for the first time she didn't feel rage or hatred. She felt a profound, aching sadness. The victory was hollow, tainted by the sheer wreckage of it all. This wasn't a win, it was a detonation, and everyone was covered in the fallout. Candace was sobbing uncontrollably now, her shoulders heaving. I was a child myself. I did the right thing. I did, she kept repeating, as if trying to convince herself. Gideon Shaw rushed to her side, putting a hand on her shoulder, but she flinched away from his touch. The performance was over. The trial, for all intents and purposes, was over. No jury would ever believe a single word this woman said again. Her testimony was not just unreliable, it was the product of a deeply wounded and duplicitous mind. Judge Davies's voice cut through the chaos. This court will take a 30-minute recess. She banged her gavel, the sharp crack sealing the moment in time. And Mr. Shaw, I suggest you have a very serious conversation with your client. Her final gaze was on Holden. It was a look of pure, unadulterated judicial contempt. As the judge swept out of the room, the courtroom erupted into a cacophony of frantic whispers. Petrocelli walked back to the table and placed a steadying hand on Callista's shoulder. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a whirlwind of emotions. How did you know? She whispered. Good lawyers do their homework, he said simply. An investigator found the leave of absence from college. The rest was just following the thread. A young woman doesn't just disappear for 5 months. I didn't know for sure until I saw the look on her face when I mentioned Medford. Callista looked across the aisle. Holden was standing, his face ashen, staring at the empty witness stand where Candace had been. He looked lost, pathetic. His entire case, his entire strategy, had been built on the testimony of a woman who was a complete stranger to him. He turned and his eyes finally met Callista's. There was no anger, no defiance, only the dawning, sickening realization of his own monumental foolishness. Callista stood up, her legs feeling stronger than they had all day. Petrocelli gave her a nod. She didn't need to stay for the aftermath. She turned her back on her husband and the ruins of his case and walked out of the courtroom, leaving the theater of law behind her. The longest walk was finally over. The heavy wooden doors of the courtroom swung shut behind Callista, muffling the chaotic sounds within and leaving her in the sudden, echoing quiet of the marble hallway. The silence was a relief, a balm on her frayed nerves. She leaned against the cool wall, closing her eyes and taking her first deep, untroubled breath in what felt like a year. It was over. The big dramatic climax she had dreaded had come and gone, and it had been nothing like she expected. She had anticipated a slow, painful defeat, a death by 1,000 legal cuts. Instead, she had witnessed a spectacular implosion, a demolition so swift and total it left her reeling. She felt Petrocelli's presence beside her. He didn't speak, just stood with her in the quiet solidarity that had become his trademark. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Daniel, thank you. You gave me my life back." "You had your life all along, Callista," he corrected gently. He tried to take it, and she tried to diminish it. All we did was show the court the truth. A side door to the courtroom opened, and Gideon Shaw stormed out, his face a mask of fury. He spotted them and marched over, pointing an accusatory finger at Petrocelli. "That was a disgusting, unprofessional ambush, Petrocelli. You dredged up that poor woman's private tragedy for a cheap courtroom trick." Petrocelli didn't flinch. "Your witness took the stand and lied, Gideon. She slandered my client's character and mocked her family. She made her private life relevant the moment she opened her mouth. Don't blame me for the consequences of the lies you encouraged her to tell." He then added, his voice dropping, "And if I were you, I'd be less worried about my tactics and more worried about your client's impending perjury charges." Shaw's face went pale. He opened his mouth, then closed it, seemingly at a loss for words. Defeated, he turned and stalked down the hallway, pulling out his phone and barking orders into it. The main courtroom doors opened again. This time it was Holden. He looked smaller than Callista had ever seen him, stripped of his usual charisma and confidence. He saw her and hesitated, his expression pleading. He took a tentative step towards her. "Callista," he began, his voice raspy. I had no idea, I swear to you, about her, about any of that." Callista looked at the man she had loved for more than a decade, the father of her children, and felt nothing. The anger had burned out, the love had long since died, and now even the pity was gone. All that was left was a vast, empty space where her marriage used to be. "It doesn't matter if you knew, Holden," she said, her voice calm and steady. It was the voice of a woman who was no longer a victim. "You knew she was lying about me. You sat there and let her tell those horrible stories. You were going to let her help you take my children. Whether you knew about her secret son is irrelevant. You knew about your own lies?" He flinched as if she had slapped him. "Callista, we can fix this. I'll fire Shaw. We can go back to mediation. We can work this out." It was the plea of a desperate man who knew he had lost all leverage. He wasn't offering a truce. He was begging for a surrender. The custody battle was lost. His financial exposure was now immense. His star witness was discredited and possibly facing legal trouble. He had nothing left to bargain with. "There is no we anymore, Holden," Callista said, the words feeling final and liberating. "You and I will be discussing the terms of your surrender. You will give me sole custody. You will provide for your children fairly and generously. You will sell the house and give me my rightful share. And you will never, ever bring that woman near my children. These are not negotiations. This is what is going to happen. Mr. Petrocelli will be in touch with your lawyer." She had never spoken to him with such authority. She watched the last bit of fight drain out of him. He simply nodded. a broken man. Without another word, Callista turned and walked away. She didn't look back. She walked down the long, empty hall, her footsteps echoing confidently on the marble floor. Each step felt lighter than the last, carrying her away from the wreckage of her past and towards an unknown but blessedly free future. As she stepped out of the courthouse and into the bright, indifferent afternoon sun, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a picture message from Maria. It was Leo and Lily, sitting side by side on the living room rug, covered in marker stains and grinning triumphantly over a drawing of what looked like a multicolored potato with legs. The caption read, "We made a monster. Hurry home, Mommy." A real, genuine smile spread across Callista's face, the first in a long time. The tears that came to her eyes now were not of sorrow or humiliation, but of overwhelming love and profound relief. Her real life was waiting for her. The chaotic, messy, beautiful, dual-fronted life that Candace Munro had so bitterly mocked. And Callista knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that it was not a burden or a handful. It was a blessing, and it was all hers. 3 months later, the dust had not so much settled as it had been swept away. Holden, true to his word in the face of utter legal ruin, had capitulated on all fronts. The divorce was finalized in a quiet, unceremonious proceeding that took less than 15 minutes. Callista was granted sole legal custody of the twins, with Holden receiving supervised visitation rights on alternating weekends. The house was sold, and with her share of the proceeds and a generous alimony and child support settlement, Callista was financially secure. She bought a smaller, charming 2-story house in a quieter neighborhood with a big backyard and a majestic old oak tree perfect for a swing set. It was a space that held no ghosts, no memories of lies or betrayal. It was a blank canvas, and for the first time in years, Callista felt the familiar, thrilling urge to create. She unpacked boxes filled not just with her children's toys and her own belongings, but with pieces of a self she had packed away long ago. Her art history textbooks, her notes for a thesis on Artemisia Gentileschi, her sketch pads filled with charcoal drawings. She enrolled Leo and Lily in a morning preschool program, and in those precious quiet hours, she started to rebuild. She began volunteering at a local art museum, the same one she had dreamed of working at over a decade ago. She started in the archives, cataloging new acquisitions, the scent of old canvas and linseed oil feeling like a homecoming. Her passion, long dormant, reignited. The curator, a sharp and observant woman named Dr. Lena Hansen, quickly noticed Callista's keen eye and deep knowledge. Within weeks, she was asked to help research an upcoming exhibition. One crisp January afternoon, Callista stood before a newly acquired painting, a dramatic Baroque piece filled with shadow and light. Dr. Hansen stood beside her, sipping tea from a ceramic mug. "You have a gift, Callista," Lena said, her eyes on the canvas but her words meant for her. "It's not just knowledge, it's feeling. You see the story behind the brushstrokes." "I was a little distracted for a while," Callista said with a wry smile. "Life got in the way." "Life has a way of doing that," Lena replied. "But the best artists and the best curators are the ones who have lived. Pain, joy, loss. It all deepens the perspective. The trick is not letting the frame become more important than the picture." The words resonated deeply with Callista. For so long, her life had been defined by the frame. The perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect home. Now she was finally focused on the picture inside. Messy, vibrant, complicated, and beautiful. She occasionally heard things about Holden. He and Candace had split in a firestorm of acrimony shortly after the trial. The scandal had cost him several major clients, and he was struggling to keep his firm afloat. Candace Munro had quit her job and moved away, vanishing as quickly as she had appeared. Callista felt no vindication, no pleasure in their downfall. They were simply figures from a previous chapter of her life, their story no longer intertwined with hers. Later that evening, after a dinner of dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets and a raucous bath time that left the bathroom floor soaked, Callista tucked her children into bed. Leo was curled around his stuffed giraffe, and Lily was clutching a well-loved picture book. "Read the monster story, Mommy," Lily mumbled sleepily. Callista smiled and picked up the book, its pages soft with use. As she read the familiar words, her children's soft breathing filling the quiet room, she felt a wave of profound peace. This was her chaotic, dual-fronted reality. It was a world of sticky fingers and scraped knees, of bedtime stories and monster drawings, of endless questions and unconditional love. It wasn't a burden, it wasn't a handful, it was everything. She finished the story and kissed their foreheads, whispering, "I love you." She paused at the doorway, looking back at her two sleeping children, their faces serene in the soft glow of the nightlight. Her life was not a grand masterpiece hanging in a silent gallery. It was a vibrant, living mural, constantly changing, with new colors being added every day. And Callista Bennett was finally joyfully holding the brush. Callista's story is a powerful reminder that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of coming to the light. It's a testament to the resilience of a mother's love and the quiet strength it takes to walk through fire and emerge not burned, but forged into something stronger. She went from being a victim in someone else's drama to being the hero of her own life story. If Callista's journey from despair to empowerment resonated with you, if you believe in the power of truth and the strength of the human spirit to overcome betrayal, please take a moment to hit that like button. Share this story with someone who might need to hear it. And for more tales of justice, resilience, and the incredible twists that life can throw our way, make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Your support allows us to keep telling these important stories. Thank you for listening.